Cohen's is not just any guy. Like, he's a major presidential candidate.
Yeah. And if you want to talk Taiwan, so Taiwan's going to have an election in January. The currently leading in the polls is the Democratic Progressive Party nominee. The Democratic Progressive Party, which was this opposition party that had been suppressed during the period of authoritarian rule, but it emerged as a democratic alternative as Taiwan liberalized. The current president's a member of the Democratic Progressive Party. She's term limited, so the William Lai is the nominee for the DPP. He just nominated as his running mate Bi Kim Xiao or Mei Chin Xiao. She is Taiwan's representative here in the United States. She's someone who knows America, who understands America. I think that was a good choice on his part. The traditional Kuomintang candidate is Hou Youyi, the former mayor of New Taipei City, and also the former police commissioner, someone who's personally very brave, too. I've met him, and he's compelling also in his own way. He's not getting much traction in the polls, but one thing about Hou Youyi, which is interesting about his character, a number of decades ago when he was police chief, there was a serial killer in Taiwan who killed the daughter of a famous actress and who had taken the South African military attaché and his family hostage there, and it was feared that he was going to kill them. There were, I think, some delivery people who noticed something was awry, called the police, and Hou Youyi himself went in unarmed and, basically, resolved the situation, captured the serial killer. Those are the two main party candidates, and then there's Mayor Ko Wen-jen, and he is with this third party. There were talks just this past week that Hou Youyi, who's lagging in the polls, and Mayor Ko would join forces. And I think as of this morning, those talks have broken down. Some somewhat curious behavior by Ko Wen-jen, Mayor Ko, in that regard. So it's unclear as if there's going to be a merged unity ticket there. So right now, with the three main contenders there, and there's also another one, Terry Guo, who lost the KMT nomination to Hou Youyi, who's another fourth party candidate. He's the Foxconn guy. He's the fellow who has, I think, that's the largest plant in China. Foxconn is an Apple supplier. And that's an interesting question of what leverage China would have over him. So you have, as of now, four presidential candidates. The DPP candidate from the governing party is right now in the lead. And probably if there was no unity ticket there, the DPP, if the election were held today, would win.
Well, since we're on the topic of Taiwan, I'm curious. Congress has generally supported the defense of Ukraine and Israel. Do you think if the People's Liberation Army invades Taiwan, will Congress also back Taiwan? Are we spread too thin?
Yeah. Okay. So that's, I think, obviously we want to deter an invasion, and that's the objective here. And to do that, Taiwan needs to be supplied with the necessary military equipment to defend itself. I will say this, that ultimately, Taiwan's defense depends on the Taiwanese people. I think that one thing that's very troubling, last year, the Taiwan's military academy, it's supposed to take in a class, I think, of 1,000 people. It only, I think there were less than 300 that were accepted there. They had to bring in non-commissioned officers to supplement that somewhat. So I think the class came to roughly 800 plus there. But in terms of a indicator of Taiwan's willingness to defend itself, I think that was something that was very disturbing. I think also on the China angle too, there are questions about whether the willingness of China to sustain casualties. And what I mean by this is, the last time China went to war seriously was 1979 in Vietnam. And it sustained a lot of casualties in a roughly 3-4 week engagement. I think the official told was something like 8,000 dead, probably much, much higher. It probably was comparable to what we saw the Russians suffering in the opening of the Ukraine invasion as well. And that's a land invasion, not a maritime invasion. One thing that was very interesting about 1979, much of the fighting that was done by soldiers from rural areas. Soldiers from urban areas, and I know this because I was a student at Columbia at the time, and there was a Chinese woman whose father was, I think, PLA, People's Liberation Army, and said that the soldiers from urban areas, Shanghai in particular, failed really, and would flee the battlefield. In fact, you had commissars, just like at Stalingrad, shooting, kind of fleeing PLA soldiers there. And so there was a discrepancy even then among sort of these urbanized Chinese soldiers. But what other important policy thing happened in 1979? The one-child policy. If you fast forward to today, in a sense, every PLA soldier's a Shanghainese soldier, a single child. I think it's something like close to 80% of PLA soldiers have no siblings. If you had an invasion and you had casualties like you saw in Vietnam or like you saw in Ukraine, you're cutting off whole family lines then. And I think it's an open question about whether the Chinese people, despite whatever initial jingoism, if they really have the will to sustain an invasion of Taiwan because of that. And if you want to talk about policy blunders, I mean, yes, China is, like I said, a systemic rival, not just a strategic rival. They seek to recapture or take over global institutions and reconstitute things in their own image. But they're not invincible by any means, and there are a lot of contradictions there that China has to cope with. One of which is this demographic collapse that's attributable to the one China policy, and the second one is this enormous amount of debt that they've run up both abroad and at home. And I think we have to look at what happens over the course of the next years, if not months, to China's economy. But it again goes to the point that we made earlier: U.S. businesses should not be subsidizing tyranny. And if we let things kind of take their natural course, if the Chinese people who were out in the streets back last year and after the COVID restrictions were lifted, the Chinese, I think, in many ways, democracy will prevail. Again, heaven sees with the eyes of the people and hears with the ears of the people. So at the same time, while Xi Jinping consolidated power apparently at the 20th Party Congress last October, we're also seeing, in addition to these centripetal forces, these centrifugal forces. And maybe we could close on this. One of the most important works of Chinese literature is the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. And the opening line there basically says that the realm long divided must unite, long united must divide. And that, I think, is very much a metaphor to what we see in China today. On the one hand, we see the Chinese Communist Party trying to centralize its power and there, and then you, at the same time, you see these kind of people pulling away from that. And you do see a tension there, and how that's resolved, I think, ultimately depends on the Chinese people. But for our part, the U.S. should not be subsidizing tyranny. Neither our government should be bailing that out, or U.S. corporations.
I think a lot of people may not realize that, like, the briefings, the hearings that you conduct are publicly available. Like, you can go watch a hearing that your commission has conducted, correct?
Yeah, if you go to cecc.gov, you will see all of our hearings there. You can click on the links and you can watch the hearings. We just held a hearing last week on China's control of the cobalt supply chains from the Dominican Republic. The month before, we had one on how China is using forced labor in the deep sea fishing and also fish processing. Fish that enters the U.S. supply chain. In fact, our Department of Defense buys fish from China that has that forced labor helped catch and then process. So do U.S. schools. So this is something where I think we really need to, not just American businesses have to cleanse their supply chains and know where what their supply chains are, but also the U.S. government does as well.
I definitely recommend anyone watching check out some of those briefings. Thank you again for joining us. This was very insightful.
Thank you very much.
Well, yeah.
No, I was going to say, as soon as Piero said something about Romance of the Three Kingdoms, I was like, this is now your favorite podcast.
Not
Chris.
just that, but the Confucian-style democracy stuff. I love all of that stuff. Restore Confucius's name. I love that.
Maybe we should put that on a
Confucius
t-shirt.
Institute.
That's it.
You're
fired, Matt.
I think the t-shirt was a better idea.
I think so. Yeah, we can make that merch. Also, I just want to point out that, you can make brilliant observations about Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Nobody's doing that with Dreams of Red Chamber. Sorry, that book sucks.
I mean, are there life lessons from Dream of the Red Chamber? Yes. Like
name one.
Probably don't marry your cousin.
Oh, okay, fair.
It's not even the cousin he wanted to marry. It was the other cousin.
Kissing cousins.
There's lots of other things, but I think this is a G-rated podcast, so maybe we should not go into those.
And that could be.
And that book is like an R-rated book, if you can understand the innuendo of Red Chamber.
There was another before Red Chambers. There was another book that was kind of a contender for the fourth Chinese classic. It was pretty much just pure erotica.
Are you talking about the peach vase?
Plum in
vase?
The flower vase
God,
or something.
I don't remember. Okay, obviously.
Yeah, which was interesting because it takes a little story from another one of the four Chinese classics, Water Margin or Outlaws of the March. It takes a story from that and then makes a whole book out of it.
So it's like an erotic fan fiction.
It basically is. It's
50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, China gave us the first erotic fan fiction. Everything came from China.
I feel like you're doing the opposite of what you wanted to do, which was boost Romance of the Three Kingdoms. And now people are going to be looking up the plum vase thing.
Yeah. Also, I no longer want to share this podcast with Piero.
I'm now imagining you trying to read Romance of the Three Kingdoms, but instead you accidentally read a knockoff version.
Oh,
what is this?
Why are they in Hogwarts? But actually, Romance of the Three Kingdoms makes me think we should play that game again.
Dynasty Warriors?
Yes.
Yeah, once we get our streaming setup figured out.
This whole podcast was like serious topics, interesting discussions about, historical Chinese
prescient
philosophy.
Observations about Taiwanese bubble tea pizza.
Yeah, and we've just completely sunk it at the end.
Does anyone watch the endings? Let us know in the comments below if you're watching this.